Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marcagiani. Welcome back to the Beyond Wellness Radio podcast. Today we have a phenomenal guest. We have Dr. Russell Jaffe in the house. Dr. Russell is a PhD, MD, 9 years all at Boston University, one graduation, lots of good knowledge there. And Dr. Jaffe was really on the conventional medical side. And I really want to dive in. We're going to get his story and how he converted more over to the functional, natural, integrative kind of model. Dr. Jaffe runs the Perk Supplement Company. He also runs a company called ELISA Act, which does premier testing for food allergens. Dr. Jaffe, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, let's just dive in. I want to hear your story and how you went into this mainstream medical research kind of world environment over to the functional, kind of integrative, more nutritional world. How'd that happen?
Well, I was trained indeed in academic medicine at Boston University. Then I matriculated to the National Institutes of Health, where I was early on appointed to the senior staff, which is a bit of an indication that my science was acceptable. And of course, I was skeptical about anything that I didn't learn in academic medicine, in internal medicine, in clinical pathology, in laboratory medicine. In fact, when I heard that Qing Wu, an acupuncturist in Washington, D.C., could get results that NIH could not get, I went with great skepticism and ended up doing a 7-year apprenticeship with him.
Wow.
Then I heard about yoga, and I heard about Dr. Ramamurthy Mishra, an MD PhD, cross-trained in Benares, wrote the textbook of yoga psychology, commentary on Patanjali Sutras. I went as a skeptic, and I was his acolyte for 5 years. Then I met a Cambodian Buddhist monk named Bhante Dharmawara, and I had the last 30 years of his life from 80 to 110, mostly together.
Wow. That's amazing.
So I came as a skeptic, but I was also curious. And because I was curious, I went outside my silo. I went outside my immediate peer group. Because I can tell you that when I started to bring information about traditional Oriental medicine and acupuncture to the National Institutes of Health, where it's practiced today, I can tell you it was met with great indifference and crashing silence. Because these were very smart people who knew that they knew more than anybody else because they were at the NIH, and I was, with them, but I was also outside, curious, finding mentors who had answers, wisdom, traditions that I knew nothing about. I knew from nothing. So I had the time with Qing and with Ramamurthy Mishra, Dr. Mishra, and with this Cambodian Buddhist monk, Bhante Dharmawara. And yes, my world has absolutely turned around, if you will. Why? Because I now advocate nature, nurture, and wholeness. I advocate physiology before pharmacology. I advocate eating what you can digest, assimilate, and eliminate without immune burden. I can tell you if you get restorative sleep and you keep your neurohormones in balance, then gratitude will rise up, at least in the springtime when you see the earth renewing itself. So yes, I do think that a functional, integrative, personalized, primary, proactive, predictive, personalized prevention practices is the medicine of the future. And my work is to speed the transition from sick care to health care. Because most people get sick care today. They really don't get health care. In your clinic, they get health care. In my world, I would like everyone to get health promotion health care, preventive, proactive care. But that is a dream today. That is an aspiration. It is also a necessity because the cost of sick care is going to sink the businesses of America. We're not going to, let me summarize very quickly. Uwe Reinhardt, a very famous Princeton health economist, he says, if you just look at the rise of chronic disease today and project it forward a generation or so, everyone's going to be in a hospital bed taking care of the person next to them. No one's going to be working or paying taxes. That's clearly not a vibrant, productive society.
Correct. 100%. Now, I'm just curious, having such a strong conventional background, MD, PhD, and having to have such an open mind to pull in other modalities and other forms of natural medicine. And, you're looking at obviously the outcome, you're looking at the effectiveness. What did your colleagues think? Because obviously conventional medicine, the allopathic pharmaceutical surgical approach, it tends to rely on not addressing the root cause, and it tends to not have a preventative nature to it. So when you are looking at these natural forms of medicine, obviously prevention kind of comes in. We're going to be talking about predictive tests that can help us look at and assess and maybe prevent some of these things. But what did your colleagues think? Did you feel like they were threatened? And then what was the atmosphere around with just the drug industry, because that kind of pushes in one direction.
Well, I'm going to answer your question, but before I answer it, Merck Sharp and Dohme gave me their annual award one time. I got the Meritorious Public Health Service Award one year. My work was featured in the New York Times at one time. So I was not unknown or unrecognized. I got to teach every year because NIH has its own university on topics that I was interested in, introducing.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, especially about people who have advanced degrees, they either come out of what's called the Descartesian reductionist mechanistic way of thinking, in which case I will not talk to them because they won't understand what I'm saying, and it probably will be uninteresting or irritating to them. Then there are the people who come out of the Goethean, Rudolf Steiner. Before that, there was Theophrastus von Hohenhoff. Before that, you can go all the way back to Maimonides and Hippocrates. But I will mention that Hippocrates practiced on the island of Kos because the conventional doctors in Athens drove him out of town because he was heretical to their beliefs. And now he's a father of Western medicine.
Unbelievable. So you did get some accredit, you did get some accolades, but not enough to incorporate a lot of these things in mainstream medicine. So there's still kind of a block.
Well, that's above my pay grade. No, that's above my pay grade. My responsibility at the time was to do my job, to publish, to communicate, to inspire, to inform, to motivate. And I'm glad to tell you that many of the people who were skeptical of my enthusiasm at the time have gone on to research in these areas, and now they too have come around. And an example, a very important example, but just a personal face on this conversation, Dr. Tony Lamas, Gervasio Lamas. He is the chairman of medicine at Mount Sinai Hospital in Miami. He is on the faculty at Mount Sinai Medical School in New York. And he led the TACT trial funded by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, NIH's NHLBI. He is a superb cardiologist, very conventionally trained, who now has documented the benefits of chelation therapy, especially for people with diabetes. And we're both on the rostrum today, we're both on the program teaching other doctors what we find to be the information that inspires us, that keeps us younger. And I will mention that he and I just got off the elevator just before our interview. And he noticed that I had lost 65 pounds. And I mentioned that I wasn't going to find them again. And I noticed that he had lost some weight. And so we commiserated with each other because it's not easy to get to your lean weight, but you feel so much better. Your restorative sleep is so much better. Your digestion is so much better. Your moods are so much better. That from my point of view, it's absolutely worth doing. In fact, it's an investment in my future. And others have heard this. I don't know if you have, Dr. Justin, but I'm planning to be dancing at 120, and I want you to be with me.
That's wonderful. That's excellent. Well, also, you got your CCN as well. So you obviously have your conventional medical training. When did you go and start learning more about nutrition in general?
I actually helped found the IAACN. I was the program director for the first 8 years of the Certified Clinical Nutritionist program. I believe that I have CCN number 1.
Wow. So before we dive into some of these predictive markers, and I also want to, get a sense of your background too, because you also started a supplement and lab company, which I think is very unique as well. But before we go into that, what would you say, give me a breakdown. What's your typical day? Like breakfast, lunch, and dinner? How do you spend your day? Doing a lot of research? What's that day like?
Well, thanks for asking. Here's my day. I'm kind of a farmer, which means I go to bed early, I get up early. I get up usually before dawn, and I happen to have a wonderful mattress that I love, and I stretch before I fall asleep. I stretch when I get up before I get out of bed. Then I kind of check myself. Then I have a morning shower while the coffee is brewing. And I do get organic Shane-grown pea berry coffee from a wonderful guy who roasts the beans the day he sends them to you.
Wonderful.
And while the coffee is brewing, I take my shower and I stretch again in the shower. And I go through a mental checklist to see if there's any part of my body that really needs help today. Then the next thing I do, aside from putting on some clothes usually, is I make sure I'm well hydrated. And I am now following a fellow who believes that it is better in the long run to take almost all of your calories in just 6 hours.
So intermittent
And then,
fasting?
yes, you can call this intermittent fasting. I like to think of it as intermittent digestion, or
Yes.
whatever is the good side of fast. To me, fasting is I don't want to fast.
Right.
I have
Right.
resistance to the word, not to the process. But I can
understand.
tell you that my mornings at this point, now I know breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but please don't knock me out about this. You asked what I actually do, and I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah.
My mornings, I stay hydrated. I sip on coffee. I don't put anything in my coffee. There are no extra sweeteners in my home. You're sweet enough as you are. You don't need to add sugar.
I love it.
And by the middle of the day, I'm beginning to feel hungry. And where am I in the middle of the day? I'm at my R&D center in Vienna, Virginia, which is also my home. So 4 days a week, I get to think, write, meditate, and then I go out in our permaculture biodynamic food forest garden, where my job is to sit and watch the pollinators pollinate and the birds eat the birdseed. And then my other job is to pick whatever is ripe for dinner, because we like to eat from our land. We have a biodynamic community supported agriculture, CSA, that we belong to, and once a week we get very fresh food. And yes, we go to Whole Foods, but we only buy things that are whole. In my home, there are very few packages. We don't need them. There are devices that make it easy to cook things very well, very quickly. Yes, we have steel cut oats, not rolled oats.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we put them in water or some broth overnight so they pre-swell.
Right.
I'm trying to think what else. For me, I often in the evening before bed, I have about a half an hour where I get in a warm tub of water that has a cup of Epsom salts and a cup of baking soda. That helps detoxify and relax. When I'm in the bath, 5 minutes I do deep abdominal breathing, just slow rhythmic breathing. If you want to know what abdominal breathing is like, watch a baby. They all know how to breathe in their abdomen. Watch most adults. They underventilate. They hypoventilate. They had so many traumas growing up that they barely move. That's right. They breathe from their chest, which is not where the action is. It's these little tiny air sacs called alveoli. I really am a doctor. You have to expand your lung. So 5 minutes of abdominal breathing, then 15 minutes of active meditation. My friend Robert Leichman wrote a book called Active Meditation, the Western Tradition, and published around 1976. Still in edition, highly recommend it and anything that Bob Leichman has ever written, because most of us have days that are structured. I have earned, and I worked hard to get this. This didn't happen overnight, but I worked hard to get to the point where I had a team of people that could take care of the day-to-day. And in fact, it's better for me to not even interact with that, because I'm constantly fixing things that aren't broken.
Correct.
But if they can't solve a problem, well, then it's mine.
That makes sense.
So 4 days a week, 4 days a week, I'm at the R&D center in the woods. I get 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day in. And how do I do that? Well, I have a hands-free telephone, and when I'm talking, which I often am, when I'm talking, I'm walking.
That makes sense. I have a setup here where I'm on a treadmill at my desk, and when I'm sitting, I have basically it's called the QB, and it put bikes pedal under your desk, and you can bike. So I do the same thing. That's wonderful. And I'm just curious about protein consumption and fat consumption. So you're doing.
Well, first of all, understand that clear, and the recent studies completely support what I'm going to say. The Greek Mediterranean diet is the healthiest diet. The next healthiest diet is the Japanese diet. In both cases, you take in lots of fresh things in joyful ways with lots of herbs, and you have 60% complex carbs, 20% of calories from fat, and 20% of calories from protein. Now, why do I say that? Because if you want insulin resistance, then go on a low carb, high protein, high fat diet. If you want to increase your risk of atrial fibrillation and magnesium deficiency and all the consequences thereof, go on a low carb, high protein, high fat diet. It's in vogue. It's called keto. I even hear that South Beach is now a modified friendly keto. I don't know what a friendly keto is. I know what ketoacidosis is. It's called starvation.
Yeah.
You will lose weight. If you do what Bob Atkins and others recommended for many years, which is eat a lot of fat, a lot of protein, and as close to zero carbs as you can. Wait, but your bones will melt.
So what's your take? There's a lot of data coming out from over at Duke University, Eric Westman's, a bunch of other docs on the ketogenic kind of template. But, they're modifying it anywhere between 20 or 50 grams of net carbs, typically around 30 net, which typically gets you like 8 servings of green vegetables a day. What's your take on that? Because there's lots of data with Westman's.
Well, the folks at Duke are doing good. The folks at Duke are doing good work. Mm-hmm. There is an integrative medicine group at Duke that they're part of. However, you can call that what you want. You can call it a rose or a petunia. It remains what it is. It's not ketogenic. Ketogenic means you deprive yourself of carbohydrates and you force your mitochondria cells, the battery of the cell, to use fats and amino acids for energy. So what they're saying is, if you're truly ketogenic, you're in starvation, and what I said before applies. Now, what they're saying is, we want to have a best of both. We want you to have the option of more fat and more protein. So we're going to cut the carbs half of what I said. So I said 60%, remember, I said no added sugar. So that's 60% from fiber, nuts and seeds and things you have to chew. Those are the things, and fruits and vegetables, which turn out to be associated with long life and good health. And depriving yourself of fresh fruits and vegetables, I don't think anyone today who really knows about the true functional nutrition literature, as a fellow of the American College of Nutrition, as someone who was on the National Nutrition Consortium appointed by Mildred Seelig at ACN in my day, I can tell you for sure that the Greek Mediterranean diet is associated with the healthiest long lives and the best energetic, mood stability, symptom reduction from diet alone. Now, it's more than diet, of course. It's what you eat and drink. It's what you think and do. But in regard to eating and drinking, with respect to the folks at Duke, they're trying to take a very overlooked problem, identify it, and find a solution by splitting the difference. As someone who is in academic medicine, I can tell you that splitting the difference is often what's done, but it rarely turns out to be very helpful.
And when you say splitting the difference, do you mean just instead of consuming zero carbohydrate, kind of like a carnivore diet, they're doing essentially, 6 to 8 servings of green vegetables, keeping the net below 30? Is that what you mean by splitting the difference?
Yes, I'm saying that the healthiest diet is 60% complex carbohydrate, 60% lots of fiber, 20% from protein, 20% from fat.
Now, would you customize the carbs if you have a patient that's coming in with let's just say, elevation in fasting insulin, let's say greater than 10 or at 15, or a functional or a glucose tolerance that stays up high 2-3 hours after a meal? Would you make exceptions and cut the carbs lower if you're dealing with those patients?
If you want to reduce hemoglobin A1C, if you want to improve glucose insulin ratio, if you want to improve HOMA, which we studied in our diabetes outcome study, which we can talk about if you want. But if you want to optimize any of those parameters, as you should, you must keep the fat less than 20% of calories, and you must have at least 40 to 100 grams of unprocessed fiber in your diet daily. That means 60% from complex carbs, 20% from fat, 20% from protein. Now, if you include seeds and nuts, you get healthy oils. But remember that as soon as you remove the oil from the seed or the nut, the protective factors are gone. And now you have something that air is the enemy of. And so there's no edible oils in my house. We cook with broth. We cook with wine. We cook with juice. We cook with foods that are wet. We like wet foods. We start all of our meals with something wet and warm. That Americans. but it's a makeover that adds years to life and life to years.
Now, you talked about
I
20%.
wouldn't, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just trying to kind of gild that point, which is I had insulin resistance when I weighed 65 pounds more than I did now.
Yeah.
I can tell you the last two hemoglobin A1C tests on myself were 4.5%. And the best outcome goal value is less than 5%. And even a little bit above 5, and you begin losing years on the far end, but losing quality of life today. It's a bad proposition.
Interesting.
So we need, it turns out we need a lot of fiber. We also need a lot of probiotic good bugs. And then we need a lot of nutrients that come from things like fruits and vegetables, especially healthy fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
To me today, the minimum is organic. I prefer biodynamic, and actually I would prefer to grow it myself if I could.
That's amazing. Now, you talked about having the fat go higher. That causes insulin resistance. What's the mechanism? Because we know fat doesn't really have much of an insulinogenic response. I mean, you have some with protein, more with carbs. So what's the mechanism of fat getting higher and causing more insulin? And just to be clear, right, we want to draw a line between, processed, kind of more rancid omega-6 or more trans fats category. And then we kind of have our healthier saturated fats in the category of coconut oil, maybe ghee or butter. And then, of course, we have our saturated avocado, olive oil, those kind of things.
No, but let me jump in on that. Yeah. And just to make a very important point. Yeah. EVO, extra virgin olive oil, is a fraud waiting to be revealed.
Okay, let's hear it. Yeah. Why?
Yeah. Well, why? Because my family and I went to Tuscany at the time when you harvest olives and you bring them to the oleandro, and overnight they grind very slowly on this grinding wheel, this stone wheel. And what comes out is dark green and viscous and delicious. And they eat it there and they love it there. And you can't buy it commercially. What you buy, and this is actually what happened. We stayed there all night. In the morning, there was this mountain of spent olive mash outside the building. And this big truck from Bertolli comes by, and I say, "What's happening?" And they say, "Oh, ha, 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 ha. Bertolli is going to take our spent olive mash, and the first time they process it, they're going to call it EVO."
Got it.
So it's a fraud waiting to happen. Ghee, on the other hand, can be liquid sunshine. Beatrice Trum-Hunter wrote about that many years ago. But remember, the ghee comes from the cow. And if that was a healthy cow, that's fine. But most ghee is contaminated with the products that the cow ate, including glyphosate, including lead and mercury, including things that And now, if you want to make a fondue and you want to use some organic grapeseed oil, a few drops, I will not tear it out of your hand. In fact, there is actually, to show you I'm not totally consistent, there is a small bottle of grapeseed oil, and we make fondues with it.
Yeah.
If you tell me you have organic peanut oil and you want to do a stir fry, I'm telling you a few drops of organic peanut oil in a wok or a cast iron pan is fine.
Yeah, it's okay.
But most of the oil should come from whole foods, seeds and nuts. The complex carbs are what regulate a slow uptake from the gut of sugar and the minerals that are necessary to process the sugar, so that you actually enhance insulin functionality by having a lot of fiber in the diet. Now, let's flip to the other side. Assuming that you will agree with me that you're sweet enough as you are and therefore you don't need any added sugar.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Most of the studies that the people have cited included sugar and complex carbs as carbs. Sorry, that's not fair. Look at the diet studies that used whole foods as their source of carbs. They got best insulin resistance below 20% of fat from calories, of fat as source of calories, less than 20% of calories from fat. Now, why is that? It turns out the more fat you take, the more rigid are the membranes of your cells. And it's a little complicated biochemistry, but trust me, I'm not making this up.
Yeah.
When the cell membrane itself, this is the wrapper around the cell. This is a very important packaging, but very dynamic membrane. When that membrane becomes more rigid, the fit between insulin and the insulin receptor becomes less efficient.
Yeah.
and you develop insulin resistance.
But
So
doesn't
that
that
is, since you
doesn't
asked,
that cell
yeah,
membrane get more rigid more with trans fats though then, or like versus higher quality omega
oh,
3s or higher quality
wait,
saturated fat? Isn't there a difference in that?
wait.
Hmm.
Well, let's go back to the trans fat comment.
Yeah.
Kumaro and Mary Enig showed in the
Yes.
late 70s, early 80s
Yeah.
that trans fats should not be part of the human diet. Trans fats should be out of your diet. It's not hard today because even the companies that used to advocate for them agree that trans fats, bad, bad, bad. Yes, trans fats do make rigid membranes, but they're bad, and so just
Yeah.
avoid them. Now, stearic acid, saturated fats are more rigid. Unsaturated fats are more flexible and fluid.
Right.
You want to have more EPA, DHA as omega-3.
Correct.
But you want it from a source that was distilled under nitrogen to remove the toxic metals and to avoid air oxidation damage of the delicate EPA DHA. Then you need enough magnesium in your body because magnesium acts as an antioxidant to protect the EPA, the unsaturated fats, the PUFAs, when they're in transit.
Interesting. Now, when you talk about some of these fish oils, how much does it matter if it's a triglyceride or an ethyl ester? What's your opinion on that?
My opinion on that is that there are 2 points of view,
Yeah.
one advocated by company A and the other advocated by
Yeah.
company B. There are virtues to both. What is critical from my point of view is that the distillation of the oil, whether it be a triglyceride, an ethyl ester or not, that the distillation be under nitrogen.
So nitrogen's important. Is that prevent the
Critical.
oxidation process from happening essentially?
To prevent what will be irreversible oxidative damage to the delicate essential fats that you are interested in. Yes. So you must distill under nitrogen, and then you want to take the fraction that has the most EPA DHA, of course, and now you want to micelize that in a soft gel because that will protect it until you swallow it, and the micellized little droplets get into the body easier because it's not easy to take up either the triglyceride or the ethyl ester. You need some bile, you need a gallbladder that works. And as I started to say, what's really important is the quality of the EPA DHA, because you can make a case on both sides, which means we really don't know the answer yet.
And of course, like, you run a supplement company. So when you're going out and you're trying to find a person to buy raw material off of, there's obviously different tiers, right? You can go and buy cheaper stuff like you would maybe the equivalent of a burger at your local McDonald's, or you can choose the high quality grass-fed organic beef at your local farmer, correct? So you have different options when you're choosing these.
No, the reason that Perk Integrative Health, the reason that Perk was founded in 1987 was because I wanted to use pharmaceutical quality and above raw materials all the time. And I was told by people who knew better that our cost of goods was going to be so high that I would have a hobby and not a business. So I did something that some people do, which is I took the marketing budget and I put it into the cost of goods. I put it into the quality of the bottom, into the quality of our service. And we've grown quite a nice business, thank you, over service without having more than a few dollars for marketing, because you'll never see a sports celebrity endorsing a Perk product. But if you take a Perk product, you'll feel the difference, because if you use the higher quality raw materials and you put them together so that it's only active ingredients all the time, which is something we've pioneered, now you have a safer, more effective form that, when you study it, as we have in community-based outcome studies, delivers feel the difference results. And
That's
as you know,
excellent.
we have an unconditional guarantee because we trust people to feel the difference that Perk approach, that is, use the highest quality and monitor it very carefully.
Yeah.
Because people will promise the moon and deliver modified dog poop.
Makes sense. And then with your fish oil, what's your opinion? Do you like the triglyceride or the ethyl? Does it matter? And then what's the difference, just to kind of put it in layman's terms?
Well, right. See, the difference is that eventually these delicate fats are going to get into a membrane as part of a triglyceride. And a triglyceride is 3 carbons, that's the backbone, and coming off of each of those carbons is a long chain called a fatty acid.
Yeah.
Now, the 2 position, there's 1, 2, 3, the middle position, The tube position of the triglyceride is the source for your cytokines, thromboxanes, and prostaglandins. It's really important. So if you put arachidonic acid in there, or you put an omega-6 fatty acid in there, you get a completely different response than if you put an EPA or a DHA in there. So in that sense, you would think the triglycerides are better. But it turns out that the body is going to deconstruct and reconstruct the triglyceride, so that's not so critical. And the ethyl ester, not the methyl ester ever, the ethyl ester is easily taken up. It has better bioavailability. So if you say to me, this is a person with a perfectly healthy gallbladder, toss the coin, both of them are okay.
Excellent.
If your bile from your gallbladder is limited, well, then you should have the ethyl ester.
And then when you're producing the product, how are you preventing the oxidation from happening outside of just keeping the temperature down? Are you putting like a rosemary antioxidant? How are you keeping it stable?
Well, what I said, first of all, there's a pharmaceutical grade fish oil company.
So you're choosing a good quality, right?
No, I'm choosing way above a good quality.
The best
quality.
There
is food grade, right. So there is food grade, which you can think of as floor sweepings.
Yeah.
Then there is quality grade, which you can think of as better than floor sweepings.
Yeah.
Once you get up to American Chemical Society, to reagent grade, to pharmaceutical grade and above, now you're at a different level. You're dealing with different companies. They provide different kinds of documentation. We do third-party post-production testing on all our products, because even though we trust our suppliers, verify, like President Reagan used to say.
Correct.
Trust and verify.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense.
So what happens is the fish oil is distilled under nitrogen. The middle fraction, the concentrate EPA DHA, is basically put into a sealed container. It then goes to the place where it's going to be micellized into the soft gel, where it is immediately and without any exposure to oxygen, put into tiny droplets that are easily taken up from your gut. And by the way, you don't get the burping and the comeback that most fish oils have. You can bite into this fish oil soft gel and you'll find it very delicate because it's not rancid.
Interesting. And then if you were to consume rancid omega-3s, you'd essentially have more lipid peroxidation, correct?
You would have more lipid peroxidation, and you would be a member of studies. There have been several studies recently that said, oh, we thought fish oils were good, but they're not really good. And if you look at them carefully, these were people taking fish oils made in oxygen, fish oils that were rancid and should, in my opinion, should not be consumed.
And then when you do consume that, if you are consuming poor fish oil, what's that doing? Is that just robbing from your antioxidant reserves? Is it sucking up more vitamin C? What's it doing in your body?
Well, it's doing several levels of harm. Yes, you're right. When you start with something that's damaged and oxidized, then the body has to use antioxidants, which are protective. Body has to use antioxidants in order to somehow get the oxygen off the molecule that has it.
Right.
Because when you put oxygen on a molecule like a fat, it's like putting a hand grenade on the fat. When that oxygen comes off, the recoil energy is going to be so high that you're going to break the membrane of the cell. You're going to damage the cell. That's a bad thing. And now you have a molecule that kind of fits in where an omega-3 or an omega-6 should, in a triglyceride in a membrane, but it doesn't have the right shape. It's got this big extra oxygen on it. So peroxides are bad. Epoxides are bad. Anything that robs your antioxidants are bad. And most people need help with their antioxidants. So anything you can do to preserve, to enhance the function of your antioxidants, like ascorbate, is to your benefit. And anything you do that depletes your antioxidants is the opposite.
Excellent. And what does that do to your cell membrane? Is it making the cell membrane more inflexible?
It's not only making it more inflexible, when the oxygen comes off, the recoil energy is so high that you actually break the membrane, and very often the cell is killed.
Wow. I really appreciate your biochem background. It really helps. And I know you're also famous for doing a vitamin C calibration. Can you talk about the vitamin C calibration and who can benefit from that?
Right. So let's talk about the C calibration, also known as the C cleanse. And the reason that we focus on ascorbate, known as vitamin C, but it's really an antioxidant. Do not think of it as a vitamin. A vitamin is something you need a little of to activate enzyme catalysts.
Right.
Albert Szent-Györgyi pointed out that ascorbate is as important to survival as light and oxygen. When you're that important, you're kind of really important. And
Yeah.
then the next question has to be, well, how much should I take? Now, Linus Pauling famously said 9 grams, then he said 18 grams, and I got to ask him why he said 18 grams, and he said, because doctors are so dumb that they can only remember a number, and if I say it long enough, then they'll remember it. And I said, but Dr. Pauling, shouldn't it be individualized? He said, of course, but doctors aren't smart enough for that. I think people, consumers are, and I think the people who are into functional, integrative, and holistic medicine are. And so the C calibration, the C cleanse, means that every 15 minutes you take a certain amount, like 1.5 grams, 3 grams, 6 grams, every 15 minutes. And notice I said grams, not milligrams. But
Right.
of course you use fully buffered, fully reduced L-ascorbate. Nature's form is L-ascorbate. You want the fully reduced, not the partially reduced, fully reduced. And by the way, our source of ascorbate is fermented. It's done by natural fermentation, but under a nitrogen blanket, so that during the production of the ascorbate, which is triple recrystallized under nitrogen, that's a challenge, but it now gives you nature's form in a concentrated way. And then we have a balance of minerals, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and zinc. You need all of them in a proportion. So if you need 1 gram, 10 grams, or 100 grams, you still get the minerals that help the ascorbate come in and help it work.
And so what's the goal? How high do you go up to? And then do you ramp down? How does the whole process work? And what should people be looking for symptom-wise?
Well, what they're going to do is once a week, they're going to check their C calibration. They're going to do it by taking the ascorbate every 15 minutes until they cleanse, until they have an enema from within, until they have a flush, something so unique that until you've had it, you don't understand it. But once you've had it once, you know what I'm talking about. So you rapidly get toxic matter and fluid pumped into the rectum and evacuated from the tush. That's what I meant by an enema from within.
Right.
You do that once a week. Now, in between, you take 50 to 75%. So let's say it took 10 grams to cleanse. You take between 5 and 7.5 grams. I recommend that people start at 50% and move up to 75% over time. You do the cleanse every week because the amount you need will likely go up over some period of time as you overcome the repair deficit that your body has accumulated for years or decades. And then you finally get to plateau, which means for 4 consecutive weeks, your cleanse is the same amount. Now you know the amount you need on a daily basis. You're taking 3/4 of the amount to do that cleanse, and you keep doing that until you get bulkier, looser stool, indicating that repair has finally completed. And now you do ramp down, so now you check it once a week as you need less and less. And the goal is to need less than 4 grams. And when we checked about 4,200 people that reported their C cleanse, the people who are asymptomatic and healthy cleansed on 4 grams or less. The people who had just a few symptoms cleansed on 4 to 10 grams. The average person cleansed on 10 to 100 grams. And there are people who need well over 100 grams, which is 100,000 milligrams, to cleanse. But it is safe, and it is safer for people to do this because the amount of oxidative damage, the amount of oxidative toxic material, the amount of nutrient deficient oxidative processed foods that people are taking in, the stress of high-tech living has dramatically increased the amount of ascorbate that people need. Ascorbate is the mother or maternal antioxidant that sacrifices herself so that all the other antioxidants can be regenerated and protected. So ascorbate is the critical one to test, and the C cleanse is the way to find out how much you as an individual need.
So essentially, just to kind of recap it, you're doing about 1 teaspoon of the L-ascorbate reduced powder, which is about 3 grams, 3,000 milligrams. Every 15 minutes, you're taking more of it, and you're trying to get to a place of bowel tolerance where you've saturated your bowels or saturated your vitamin C stores, and now the stools start to get loose. And that number may be higher in the beginning, and as your vitamin C levels get more depleted, or topped off, so to speak, then that threshold to move the bowels, as you said, drops. Is that correct?
Well, no, let me clarify.
Yeah.
My friend Bob Cathcart introduced bowel tolerance. It has a fatal flaw. The fatal flaw of bowel tolerance is you creep up on the amount you need as opposed to the cleanse where you rapidly ramp up.
But
So
you're
it's
doing
not a,
it in 3 gram increments though, right? Teaspoon, 3
no,
grams every 15 minutes?
no, no. Let me say again what I
Yeah,
said before.
sure.
If you're really healthy, you use a half a teaspoon, which is a gram and a half.
Gram and a half.
If you're
Got
a
it.
tip, right? If you're a typical person, you use a teaspoon, which is 3 grams. But
Got it.
there are many people who need 2 teaspoons, which is 6 grams, and they need it for hours. And if you do 6 grams for 4 times in an hour, that's 24 grams. If you do that for 2 hours, that's 48 grams. Most people will cleanse in that time. The idea is to rapidly saturate the body with the ascorbate so that the ascorbate can energize the rectum, which is really from the kidney embryologically, and pump toxic matter and extra water into the rectum. And that what comes whooshing out, flushing out, cleansing out.
Right.
So yes, it's the same idea, but it's the next generation after bowel tolerance. It's the C-cleanse or the C-calibration. And it really depends on how well you are. If you're really well, you don't need that much. But if you're a typical American, even 3 grams, and I just had someone contact me about this. They took 3 grams every 15 minutes for 5 hours.
That's a
And
significant amount.
yes, sir. But if they had done 6 grams, they would have flushed and calibrated. But after 5 hours, what they proved was they had a lot of oxidative burden and they needed a lot of ascorbate. So you really do, I really recommend that folks read the literature that we have. This is free to download online.
Yep.
You can look up C-cleanse, you can look up Joy of Living the Alkaline Way or Alkaline Way Guide. And we want folks to help them, we want to help people understand themselves so they can do it smoothly, efficiently, and generally within a couple of hours. So I personally do my cleanses on the weekend, and I can cleanse within a couple of hours. But often we hear from colleagues that people try, say, a teaspoon, and that means 3 grams every 15 minutes. That means 12 grams an hour, but they need 70 grams to cleanse, and it's going to take them more time than they're willing to take. And I don't think it should be your whole day. You shouldn't be sitting on the commode waiting for a cleanse the whole day.
So if that's the case, could you
and
go up in faster increments? Could you go up in tablespoon increments if you wanted to go faster?
Well, understand that you want something close to an isotonic isosmotic beverage. So when you go to 6 grams or 2 teaspoons, you're now talking about at least 8 ounces.
I see.
And if you go above that, you might go to 12 or 16 ounces. Most people don't want to drink that much.
I see.
I have no objection to that. I'm just saying that you don't make it too concentrated and don't make it too dilute. You don't want hypotonic, you don't want hypertonic. You want as close to isotonic as you can get. And that's why what we recommend is, as the upper dose, is the 2 teaspoons in 8 ounces. Could be water, could be a herbal beverage, could be a juice that you diluted 1-to-1 with water. And by the way, some people find if they take the recycled glutamine, or they take a dose of magnesium and choline citrate, or they take a dose of Digesta-Guard before the cleanse, that things go more smoothly and more easily.
Excellent. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around what the difference between this cleanse is and just typical bowel tolerance by vitamin C. Is it because it's in the L-ascorbate reduced form with the minerals? Does that make it different? What's happening? It's different.
Well, Bob Cathcart himself recommended sodium L-ascorbate, and he did that because he knew that ascorbic acid would pull the dentin, the calcium out of the teeth, so you don't want to use ascorbic acid. He didn't want to use a synthetic form, and I agree with him on that. But what he said is, you just keep taking it until you poop.
Yeah.
That's called bowel tolerance.
Yes.
Here's the fatal flaw with bowel tolerance, and I spoke with Bob about this, and he agreed with me on this. He was a very honest guy. When you do bowel tolerance, you have a very high probability that if you have a long transit time, a long digestive transit time, as many Americans do, that you will recirculate toxic matter throughout your body and feel worse.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and feel worse. In contrast with the C-cleanse, you quickly ramp up, saturate the ascorbate throughout every cell of your body, and then pump the toxic matter and the extra fluid into the rectum, and it comes out quickly, and you don't get the recirculation of toxic matter. People don't want to feel worse on the way to feeling better.
Well, you motivated me. I'm going to go pick some up and do my own vitamin C calibration very soon.
Please,
Thanks for the inspiration.
please to do.
That. Excellent.
Please to do.
So let's
Let us
transition the
know.
conversation. You talked about there are 8 predictive markers for your health to kind of give a window, kind of your check engine light, so to speak, to see how you're functioning in an optimal perspective. So let's just kind of break down those 8 markers briefly, and let's do a quick little blurb on each of them. So what's number 1?
Well, yes. Now, with regard to the predictive biomarkers, we reviewed 100,000 lab tests because
Wow.
we wanted to know what covers epigenetics.
Mm-hmm.
And epigenetics is everything that's not genetics. Epigenetics is everything you can influence with your lifestyle. It turns out to be really important. It's 92% of your lifetime health. Epigenetics influences your genes. Your genes are not a fixed blueprint. They're rather dynamically acted upon and modified by your habits of daily living. And your habits of daily living are summarized in epigenetics. And there are 8 of these tests, and I'd like to go through them, and I'd like to point out what's unique about our interpretation. So
Wonderful.
the first one, and some of these are familiar, hemoglobin A1C. And the best outcome goal value is less than 5%. Now, today, if you ask most diabetologists, most doctors who specialize in diabetes, they'll tell you that they don't want to know the fasting glucose. They don't want to know the fasting insulin, the 2-hour postprandial. They want to know the hemoglobin A1C. It's the average sugar stuck onto your hemoglobin protein over 3 or 4 months. So it's a very good average risk predictor. It's an all-cause morbidity and mortality predictor. It predicts whether you're going to live 10 or more years pretty accurately, and the goal value is less than 5%. Now, the second test is high sensitivity C-reactive protein, HSCRP, and you do need the high sensitivity version. Ridker and Rafai pointed out that while C-reactive protein is a good measure of acute inflammation, the more common chronic repair deficit, which is what inflammation really is, it's really repair deficit, that can be measured with a high sensitivity C-reactive protein known as HSCRP, and that should be less than 0.5.
And is that the same as the cardiac CRP? I think it's the same,
yes,
right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Originally, Ridker, who is a cardiologist, thought that the high sensitivity test was cardio-specific. And it's sometimes referred to as the cardiac CRP.
That helps. That's helpful.
And yes, no, I'm glad you brought that up. It's not cardiac specific, but it is sometimes called cardiac CRP. And it is the high sensitivity or the HSCRP that we want. And the best outcome goal value is less than 0.5.
I see a lot of patients that want the HSCRP, but their lab, whether it's Quest or LabCorp, only has the cardiac. And from what I've seen, like you just said, it's the same thing.
Oh, same thing. Same thing. So the next test, the third test in the sequence, is known as homocysteine. This is a plasma test, and you must process the specimen within 30 minutes, or the lab shouldn't even run it. But a plasma homocysteine predicts atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease almost better than any other single marker. And when you combine the 8 predictive biomarkers the way we do, you've covered all of your cardiovascular risk. And notice what's in here and what's not in here. And we can talk about what's not in here at the end. So the next test is your immune tolerance test. Oh, sorry, the homocysteine should be less than 6. The homocysteine should be less than 6.
Less than 6.
And that, yes, homocysteine should be less than 6. Again, don't pay any attention to the lab range. Healthy people have a homocysteine less than 6. They have a high methionine, a low homocysteine. They are protected from cardiovascular disease, and they can methylate, which is a very important function for moving things around in your body. So homocysteine value less than 6 on a plasma properly done specimen.
And if that level is on the higher side, what nutrients should we add in to help bring that down, assuming a diet and lifestyle is good?
Yes, well, you'd be surprised actually how much B complex, including folate, how much magnesium and choline citrate, how much betaine hydrochloride, known as trimethylglycine, people need in order to keep a healthy homocysteine. And you can look at all these cycles if you want, because I'm a biochemist and I do it in my sleep. But the bottom line is you need at least a super B complex. You need folate, probably milligrams a day. You need trimethylglycine, at least 250 milligrams a day. You need enough ascorbate to protect other antioxidants. With that, and with enough magnesium and choline citrate to activate your ATP, you too can have a low homocysteine and a nice high methionine.
Interesting. And then just the backstory for everyone listening, they can look at it here is Kilmer McCulley, who was a Harvard researcher that discovered the homocysteine atherosclerosis link, was basically laughed out of Harvard 10, 20 years ago in this discovery, but now it's becoming mainstream and it's even part of your predictive markers for overall health.
Kilmer published in 1967 when I was a young scientist in Boston. I knew him then. He went to the VA where he had a distinguished research career, but you're right, he got laughed quite out of Harvard. It's just he was right, and they were ignorant.
Yep. Interesting.
Now the fourth test is the immune tolerance test, known as LRA, lymphocyte response assay. Lymphocytes are specialized white cells, and they respond to things that are foreign and harmful, but they don't respond to neutralizing and helpful things. So you want an LRA. The LRA by ELISA Act is what we recommend, and the goal is to have no intolerances, to be completely tolerant in your immune system, and healthy people with a healthy digestion and a healthy intake of the nutrients they need. The few of them that we've found who are asymptomatic tend to have no reactions out of hundreds and hundreds of substances that we can now accurately measure on 1 ounce of blood, as long as it gets to us within a couple of days.
Now, with that test, how is that different than your typical food allergy IgG or IgA? There's companies out there like Everlywell is a big one you see on Facebook all the time, which I think is looking more IgG, IgA. How's that different from that typical, food allergy that's more antibody-based?
The antibody tests were developed in the 1950s. They were outmoded in the 1980s. They're still offered by most labs because they're easy to do and impossible to interpret. So when you get an IgG antibody result, you have to ask yourself, is this a beneficial, neutralizing, helpful antibody? Or is this a complement-fixing, harmful antibody? And you can't tell.
So essentially with the ELISA Act, you're looking at the lymphocytes and you're able to see if there's a T cell kind of mediated response to these foods specifically. Is that how you're looking at it more specifically?
Yes, the innovation that we brought to immunology was the first amplified procedure done on the surface of a white cell called a lymphocyte. And the novelty is that we can do reproducible tests, that is less than 3% variance. So we do a functional cell culture more precisely than a physical chemistry lab measures an antibody. And the point you made that you jumped to is correct. More important than B cell antibodies, and more important than distinguishing helpful from harmful B cell antibodies, are the T cell responses, which you can only get from a cell culture. Only get from a cell culture.
So the IgG and IgA, that's more B cell mediated, and this
100%. Not more. B cells make antibodies.
Antibodies, correct.
B cells make antibodies through specialized antibody factories called plasma cells. When you do physical chemistry, say IgG or any antibody measurement, and I don't care if you used a cooked antigen, I don't care if you use a freeze-dried antigen, I don't care if you used an aerosolized antigen, I'm telling you, if you're measuring antibodies, you're doing old-fashioned physical chemistry and you can't interpret whether it's good or bad. And since you don't know the function and you need to know the function, I say don't do tests that are intrinsically incapable of giving you the information you need. And then the point you made is well made, which is T cells are more important than the antibodies, and you get nothing about the T cells when all you're doing is old-fashioned physical chemistry. So we outmoded this in the 1980s. We have over 80,000 cases in our database. We've done over 25 million cell cultures. We've published more outcome peer-reviewed studies that show the benefit of this approach when it is applied just by people living their lives. But as you said, a lifestyle program, a program to add life to years and years to life. And we're more excited today than ever because the data continues to come in that we have an advanced approach. It's part of this predictive biomarker suite of advanced interpretations. And I'm glad to tell you that we at the Health Studies Collegium have been able to pioneer much of this, validate it to the satisfaction of our most difficult critics, and now make it available to colleagues and consumers.
Very good. Now, your test for this is the ELISA Act biotechnology test. Now, I'm just curious though, is ELISA the same thing as the enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay test, or is that just kind of a play on words there?
No, it's very specifically ELISA Act.
Yeah.
Which is the coming together of what you said, ELISA.
Yeah.
With ACT, Advanced Cell Culture Technique.
Okay, so it's combining it. Okay.
Yes, it's the first time that an amplified procedure was done not with a sandwich assay like a conventional ELISA introduced by Burson and Yalow in 1953.
Yeah.
Back then. This is using a lymphocyte enzyme that when the cell is resting, when it doesn't see anything that it reacts against, the enzyme's turned off. Because this is the same enzyme that turns the cell on when it needs to go through mitosis and reproduce itself. We were fortunate enough to figure out the specific kinase at the MHC locus, for those of you who are super technical. The antigen-presenting cell in this autologous ex vivo cell culture wiggles over to the lymphocyte, presents the processed antigen at the MHC locus, turns on the kinase. We see the results of that. This is the bringing together for the first time of ELISA, just as you said, and cell culture.
Interesting. So you're able to get the antibody response from that, the IgG, IgA, IgM. You're able to get the immune complexes, and then you're also able to look at the T cell activation there too. All three.
No, exactly right. See, lymphocytes are smart enough that they will only react to harmful antibodies. So we get the meaningful harmful antibodies, and we ignore the helpful neutralizing antibodies. And then, yes, we get the immune complexes, which is IgM, anti-IgG antigen. And most importantly, we get the T cell reactions.
Excellent. Very good. What's the next marker?
Yes, the next marker, the fifth one, is measuring the pH, or the acid alkaline state of your urine after rest. It turns out after 6 or more hours that the urine in the bladder equilibrates with the bladder lining cells. And now you get once a day a measurement of cellular metabolic status. And if you lack magnesium, you have metabolic acidosis. If you have enough magnesium, you have a healthy, happy cell. Why is that so important? Well, magnesium is not just an electrolyte that balances calcium. You need 1 molecule of magnesium for every ATP molecule to do any work in your cell. You need magnesium to activate your mitochondria so you can get the toxins detoxified. You need magnesium to activate hundreds, maybe thousands of enzyme catalysts. You need magnesium to protect essential fats in transit. Magnesium is nature's calcium channel blocker. The problem has been that until very recently, magnesium has been notoriously hard to get in. It tends to run out as soon as it comes in, and therefore it's been forgotten. Now, what we did was find out how to make inverted micellar nanodroplets. So you combine ionized magnesium salts with choline citrate, and now you get enhanced uptake and chaperone delivery to the cells who are hungry for it. So now we should remember magnesium.
Wonderful. Excellent. What's the next marker?
Well, the goal value for pH is 6.5 to 7.5. If you're below that, you're too acid and you need more magnesium. If you're consistently above 7.5, it might be catabolic illness, and that's something you don't want, but we could talk about later.
And we want the urine, though. The saliva doesn't quite matter.
Urine. Urine. And the reason we want the urine is because that's what we standardize. But more importantly, if you put a Kirby cup, if you put a little plastic disc over your parotid gland in your mouth and you collect pure parotid saliva, you too can measure the pH of that. But having had that done to me when Frank Oppenheimer was a postdoc and needed some subjects, very few people will do that. And what we call saliva or spit, it's a combination of gingival fluid, serosanguinous exudate, some saliva, some submandibular, some parotid. It turns out that saliva is not what you think it is, at least not in most Americans' mouths. And talk to the dentist. There are very few Americans that have a healthy mouth.
And then with the urine, are we testing first morning urination, or can it be a random sample?
No. There's only one time of day. You can only get a meaningful measure after 6 hours of rest. So when after 6 hours of rest, the next urine, yes, and you, by the way, during those 6 hours, you can go to the bathroom and go back to bed. You just can't go to the gym or the kitchen.
Got it. Because you're going to create acid byproducts through your muscle activity and such.
And other than after the 6 hours of rest, there are somewhere between 20 and 40 variables that influence urine pH at any random time.
That totally makes sense.
Right. Now, the next measurement, excuse me. The next measurement is vitamin D, specifically what's called 25-hydroxy-D. But if you just ask for a vitamin D, that's what they're going to do. Now, there are 3 forms of vitamin D, and there are some experts who say measure all 3 of them. I do not advocate that, partly for cost, and partly for practicality. So if you think there's something wrong with the way their kidneys are processing vitamin D or their liver is processing vitamin D, then you might want to do all three different what are called isomers. In general, you want the 25-hydroxy-D, and the goal value is 50 to 80. Now, there was recently an article in the New York Times, and a very distinguished science writer says, almost everyone in America is low in vitamin D. It's normal to be low in vitamin D, so don't even measure vitamin D and don't supplement. Now, did you understand what I just said? Do you understand how silly that is?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So let me clarify for everybody, because I know you know this, but when vitamin D is below 20,
rickets.
Well, of course, your bones are going to fall apart, yeah. But more importantly, you just tripled or quadrupled your cancer risk.
Exactly.
And you probably tripled your cardiovascular risk. Because vitamin D, we call it a vitamin. It's actually a neurohormone. It actually regulates cell division. It does a whole lot of things. And we know, in my opinion, the best outcome goal value, 50 to 80. The vitamin D council, I believe, says 40 to 70, but that's close to 50 to 80. And the ranges that we have set, or the values that we have set, give you a certain latitude. So if you take a little bit too much vitamin D and you get up to 90 or 100, I have no concerns. So when I say 50 to 80, I don't mean that 81 is a problem. I'm saying the safer range that we know to be effective and protect you from these profound chronic illnesses, 50 to 80. And how much vitamin D do you take? How much vitamin D do you take? Well, as much as you need to get into the 50 to 80 range.
Yeah, as much as you need.
And I take, and I prefer for people to take drops under the tongue that get absorbed. Yes, well, that's a tricky word. Be careful of that. But drops under the tongue before you swallow them are easily taken up. And many, many people, over 40 million, according to Mike Hollick, over 40 million Americans don't absorb vitamin D from their gut. They've got to take it up. They've got to take it up.
Interesting.
From their mouth.
Yeah, I know Hollick. He's also a researcher over at BU as well, right? At your alma mater.
That's where I met Mike Hollick.
Oh, okay. He's been there for a long time, right?
Oh yeah, he helped develop the methods. About that, he helped develop the fundamental methods in vitamin D research. He's known as Dr. Sunshine.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm seeing some people online, they're pushing back a little bit because we have vitamin D3, the pre-vitamin D we make on the skin, sunlight hits it, that cholesterol, I think, goes through our liver and gets formed into 25-hydroxy vitamin D, which is calcidiol, and then calcidiol hits the kidneys and gets converted to calcitriol. So more people I'm seeing are saying, hey, we got to measure calcitriol or the vitamin D that's activated through the kidneys, and they say there should be like a 1-to-1 ratio on the D3, the 25-hydroxy versus the 125, which is the calcitriol. What's your opinion on that? Having that 1-to-1, or how important the 125 is?
Having spoken to 12 different world's experts, and their opinions matter, and mine doesn't because vitamin D is not my particular expertise, I can tell you they each have a different opinion. With respect to what your folks were saying, if you have the resources and you want to have the maximum useful information, then at least you would measure the 25-hydroxy and the 125-hydroxy.
Got it.
But you might want to measure the precursor as well if you're going to do that. But I will offer to most people for whom the value proposition, including how much is this going to cost?
Right.
Leads me to conclude for most people to start with 25-hydroxy-D. No disrespect on the question, but start with 25-hydroxy-D.
I agree too.
Bring people into the 50 to 80 nanogram per ml range. Then, if you have any question, or if you want to just be a more scientific and evidence-based practitioner, when you get them into range, then measure and see if you have a 1-to-1 ratio.
And what if there's not? Would there be something you would do specifically? I know some data says you should give resveratrol to help with that. Some say it can be an infection kind of thing. What's your take on why that may be skewed, where 25 is higher and 125 is lower?
Well, you raised several very good points. My friend happens to own resveratrol globally, and I can tell you they're going out of the resveratrol business because resveratrol has very low bioavailability. It is a polyphenolic. It is in red wine, especially Grand Cru red wine. However, because it is very low bioavailability, which means very low solubility, When you give it in the doses that people have tried to give it, you end up irritating the gut and irritating the immune system. So we have for a long time, at least the last 25 years, advocated the safer, more effective polyphenolics that activate your innate immune system and do many wonderful things for you, including build your bones. And that's quercetin dihydrate as the flavonoid, and soluble OPC, orthoproanthocyanidins for the chemists, as the flavonol, because you need flavonoids and flavanols. These are the colorful compounds in foods, but almost all of them in high doses are mutagenic, which means oncogenic, which means promote cancer because they have such low uptake and they can be irritating. And if you irritate the immune system enough, it will become very upset.
Makes sense.
So we recommend the flavonoids that are safer, quercetin dihydrate. We recommend the flavanol that's safer, the soluble OPC. We have them together in different forms because they help repair, they reduce pain, they enhance many functions of the innate immune system. And when your innate immune system is functioning, you are in a repair mode where you don't have to call in the extra troops, the what's called the adaptive immune response, which are the lymphocytes and the other delayed immune reactive cells. So what you want is to provide a lot of energy to the innate immune system so it can defend and repair you, so it can recycle foreign invaders down to their building blocks and make them available for the body to build itself up. And then more importantly, after you do defense, you have to do repair. Well, most Americans are in defense mode almost all the time. You can think of it this way. During the day, we do more defense work. When we're getting restorative sleep, we do more repair work. Notice I snuck in restorative sleep. Now, if you need restorative sleep, then you might need that salt and soda bath, the dichromatic light, which we didn't talk about, but that goes along with it, the abdominal breathing, the active meditation, the magnesium and choline citrate, maybe tryptophan with some zinc and B6, so that your body can make the serotonin and the melatonin. I never give serotonin, I never give melatonin, because the body never floods itself with those neurochemicals and neurohormones. I give the tryptophan in a way that it goes exactly in the brain where it's needed, where the brain turns it into serotonin or melatonin as needed. And by the way, it has a very short life in the body because it's too potent to leave around. So we follow physiology before pharmacology, but that also means we study physiology. And frankly, most of my colleagues today, they know about pathology, and I am a doubly board certified pathologist, but they don't remember physiology. And biochemistry flummoxes them.
Yeah, I agree. Biochemistry and physiology, and when you apply it, that becomes clinical nutrition and functional medicine, essentially, right?
Absolutely.
Very good.
So now the next test is an omega-3 index. You want to know where you are, omega-3 to omega-6. This is Bill Harris's test. It can be done on a blood spot. And the goal value is more than 8%. And the quick anecdote is that Bill Harris was in the offices of Professor Patty Doister at the Military Medical School. She and I are friends. I came by because I was going to confer with her. And Bill was lamenting the fact that it's so hard to find adults with healthy omega-3 levels. Patty points to me. He pulls out a Lancet. He calls me up a few days later. He says, your omega-3 is 13.2%, something like that. I said, well, is that better than 8? He said, well, we think it is. We know that above 8 is good. But let's say that you were just a consumer or just a listener to the show. You might assume that 13 is better than 8. But I'm a scientist, so I had to ask Bill, is it really better than 8? And he's an honest enough scientist to say, we think it is, we pray it is, we hope it is. Come back in 5 or 10 years, we'll have more data.
Funny.
So that's the omega-3 index. And then we only have one more, and that is a urine test. This is the measure of oxidative damage and risk in your DNA. It's called 8-oxoguanine. That is 8-OXO-GUANINE, 8-oxoguanine. And because it's a urine spot test, we actually have a value per milligram of creatinine. So your best outcome value is less than 30 milligrams per milligram of creatinine.
There's a test
these are the best outcomes
by Genova. It's called 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine. It sounds very similar to that. I know that's an oxidative stress marker. That sounds simple.
I'll have to, yes, yes. I think that we're talking about the same molecule. I can tell that this molecule has several different names. They're all the same. You want the DNA, the nuclear DNA oxidative stress marker. That's the one you want.
That's it. That's correct.
Good. Now, we help people interpret tests that other labs do. So if folks want to know about these best outcome goal values and how to attain them, then you would talk to our health coaches and our nutritionalists. If you want to have them performed, they can be performed through our lab or through your lab, although the LRA is distinctive to us and the omega-3 index is distinctive to Bill Harris.
Very good. And then what's the range you want to be in for the omega-3 again?
Yes, for the omega-3 index, you want more than 8% to be omega-3.
And with yours, you were up to 13, you were saying, right?
13 plus.
Okay. So what we're going to do is
at the moment, there's only one person who has a higher value, if I remember correctly from what Bill said. And it was actually a youngster, it was a teenager, but this mom took very much pride in telling us how much omega-3 she got her kids to eat.
Wow. And is there a high threshold for that just because of the lipid peroxidation? Would you say 8 grams, 4, 6? What's your high-end recommendation? You know, we're assuming pharmaceutical grade, super high quality, so it's not oxidized.
Well, if the question is how much EP and DHA do I take, and I would never take an oxidized product, and I would never recommend anyone do that. But I currently take 8 to 10 grams a day, and that may seem high, but I can tell you that given my particular background, that's what seems to be needed to keep all the other parameters in the range that I would like them to be. So I'm personalizing my intake.
Plus, you're also probably calibrating the L-ascorbate, which is, you know, stabilizing membranes too, right?
Oh, of course. And I take the polyphenolics, and I take the Super B complex that has a full mineral complex, and I occasionally take some extra zinc because I'm a man. So yes, and I take prebiotics, probiotics, and symbiotics. So yes, I actually sent someone a photograph of the 12 supplements that I take a day, and I take 2 to 4 doses a day of those supplements. Now, I'm like everyone else when it comes to opening and closing bottles. I understand that it's a commitment I have made because it helps me feel and function so much better. By most physical and functional measurements, I'm half my age.
That's
and if
amazing.
I can keep that up for another 30, 40 years, it'll be a good run.
Excellent. Dr. Russell Jaffe, it's been an amazing podcast. Lots of knowledge bombs, lots of great information. Were there any other biomarkers? Was that all the 8?
No, we got through all 8 of them.
Excellent.
That was pretty quick, but thank you for being such a good host and for making sure that I stayed on top.
Excellent. I'm going to put in the show notes here, we're going to put the links to the ELISA Act biotechnology, food allergy, lymphocyte test. We'll put the vitamin C, L-ascorbate, the potent C-Guard powder links and everything. So if anyone wants more information, we'll put it down below. Is there anything else you want to leave the listeners with here today, Dr. Jaffe?
Gosh, yes. I would like folks to know that in the 21st century, we have to save our own lives. You cannot rely on science from the 19th or 20th century. I'm not even sure today you can rely on an expert. As Jackie Mason, the comedian, says, in the phone book or wherever you look up your doctor, it lists every condition and whether they were present or absent the day your problem occurred. And I'm just trying to be a little bit humorous about it. I think consumers should be very active today learning about themselves through self-assessments, through tests that can be interpreted to best outcome individual levels, as we've just been talking. Now, this is a new paradigm. This gives information, inspiration, and if you put some effort and perspiration in, you can recover decades of quality life, and you can feel and function better tomorrow. It's the best value that I have found in all my years in science. And by the way, this is not only how I follow through, I do walk my talk, but this is how my parents lived near the end of their life and the way my children live today. So put us to the test and find out how well you can feel.
Well, thank you so much. I think you did a phenomenal job taking the hard science, biochem science, and applying it and making it practical so people can apply it. So thank you so much. I look forward to having you back soon to dive in deeper. And you have a phenomenal day, Dr. Jaffe. You take care.
You the same. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Bye now.